Welcome to the Start Something Show. Join world-renowned experts, change agents, and everyday folks who have done the amazing. All here to help you start something incredible. Now it's time to step out, live your perfect day, and create a legacy with your host, Tina Dietz.
Hello, it's Tina Dietz, and welcome to another Backstage Pass. We are welcoming back to the Backstage Pass stage Michel Neray, truly, not kidding, one of my favorite people on this planet. Michel is not just a colleague and an expert. He is also a friend and a mentor. I'm pleased to call him such. He is the founder of Momondays, a monthly show that's grown from a single location on the second floor of a tea room in Toronto to nightclubs from coast to coast in Canada and the U.S. He is known as the master of the essential message for companies around the world, really, and he's spoken on tons of stages. Everywhere. He's written books. He's a master practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic programming. You can read his full bio on his page at the Start Something Show on his episode number. Oh, God. I'm just really happy to have him here. I get tongue-tied when I talk about Michel because I just friggin' adore him. So, Michel, we are going to talk today about storytelling.
Yes.
And why is this important? Let's just start right there.
Well, yeah, and storytelling, and I'm not talking about the kind of storytelling that we tell our children, although that fits into this model as well. I mean, all storytelling is basically, very similar, but reason why storytelling, and what I talk about is really purposeful storytelling. How do we use stories to make change, to influence people, to provide leadership, to sell, to all of those things. I mean, when you think about it, stories are at the heart of how we communicate with each other. It's how we connect. It's how we appear human, and it's how we appeal to the humanness in other people. It's also how we embed the lessons, messages, insights, sales that we want to embed in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish. So stories are literally everywhere. When
they are.
Stories are everywhere, and when you think about it, we were an oral culture long before we were a written culture, and that's how we passed knowledge down from generation to generation. What was through stories. We are, as human beings, we are hardwired to be engaged by stories, to look for the deeper meaning in stories. It's how we make sense of the world around us. It's how we make sense of who we are as individuals. And our ears are always on ultra sensitive mode for listening to the stories of other people. I remember doing looking into some research. I can't remember exactly. I should get these statistics down, but it's something like, facts and figures in presentations. Right after a presentation, people will remember half of the presentation if it's mostly full of facts and figures. The next day they'll remember 25%, and a week later they'll remember 10%. But some incredible statistics, and again, don't quote me on this, but it's something like 80% of people will remember the story. And so like I said, we're hardwired. Well, I have a personal story around that. This really happened to me. I was doing a keynote presentation for a real estate company, a realtor company in the U.S. It was National Realtor, and they brought me into their annual convention with all the real estate agents from all over the U.S. were there. And I really, because I'm an expert also in using, I didn't call it storytelling back then, but it was really in how do you differentiate yourself, personal brand differentiation, all of that. Who doesn't need it more than a real estate agent that, on the surface of things just appears to be offering the same thing as everybody else. So that's why they brought me in. And I gave them all kinds of brilliant strategies, and I showed them what the big corporations were doing, and I showed them how they can apply it to their own individual businesses and all that stuff. And at the end, I told a story. I told a story about my mother, my father, and how it made me the kind of how their history made me the person that I am. And I need to say a little bit about this. I mean, my mother's a Holocaust survivor. My father fought in the French Foreign Legion. So, there were some dramatic details to this, and how it influenced the kind of kid that I was, and how that made me the kind of professional adult that I am today. And I told that story and whatever. A year later, I'm in Virginia giving another talk somewhere else. Somebody bursts through the doors, comes running up to me, and says, "Michel, do you remember me?" I said, "No, sorry." And he said, "I was in your keynote last year in New Orleans." I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "And I remember the story you told about your mother." So he didn't say, "I remember the brilliant strategies you gave us." He didn't say, "I remember that incredible, mind-blowing statistic you showed us." He said, "I remember the story you told about your mother." This is how we make ourselves memorable. So, onward. So we don't have a whole lot of time here. I have since developed a whole series of workshops based around purposeful storytelling.
Before you get into the meat of the matter, I just want to point to our members that I want you to listen to this, what Michel has to teach you today, not just from the sense of telling your story from a stage or telling your story verbally, but also telling stories in written format, telling stories in sales, telling stories even in social media. So this is really a global concept. So don't limit yourself to thinking that this is just for verbal, oral, or stage. Okay, so I just want to point that out.
Thank you for clarifying that, Tina, because when you think about it, when we're selling, we are telling stories. So I'll give you an example. We all have to come up with testimonials and case studies. Well, a case study is really a story. It's a story about the work that we do with a client and the results they got out of it and the challenges they had and the challenges we had and what the secret sauce is and what happened in the end and how we live happily ever after. It follows the exact same story structure as what I'm going to teach in the next 10 minutes.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, so story development, this piece, this story structure piece, is, like I said, part of a whole series of master classes that I give through Momondays and Purposeful Storytelling. And it really does cover the story development piece, the whole performance piece, how to inject humor, and how to word the phrasing of the lesson or the moral or the key. If you're doing a speech, it's kind of that thing that you repeat, like the chorus of a song. And also how we describe it in the topic and our own bios, because that's part of it as well. People come to it. But so this is one element of that. And when I started working on this, and of course I also have the benefit of having run Momondays now for almost 4 years, I've heard a lot of stories, and I know what works and I know what doesn't work. And so I'd like to start off with just this notion that story structure, there really is only one. There are multiple variations of it, but there really is only one that has been around since, ancient Greek times. And in fact, it's still around today in modern Hollywood and television and even adult and cartoons. Or sometimes I like to say, it's been around from Homer to Homer.
Dope. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
So really, when you think about it, every story is a 3-act play. And, that's what there's a beginning, middle, and end. And so now that sounds incredibly simplistic. and different people have different names for it. There's another Robert McKee, an expert in cinematic storytelling, talks about hook, hold, and payoff. There are all kinds of formats, but they all follow a 3-act play. And I just want to read you something by Billy Wilder, regarded as one of the most brilliant and versatile filmmakers of Hollywood's golden age. He was only one of 5 people to have won Academy Awards as a producer, director, and screenwriter for the same film. That was The Apartment, I think, back in the either late 50s or early 60s.
It's a brilliant film.
Brilliant film. Anyway, he said, the first act of a story, you put your character up a tree. The second act, you set the tree on fire. And then in the third act, you get him down.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. That kind of rising action, climax, declining action, resolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. So now you use language that's declining action and rising action. I want to do it a different way. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., brilliant storyteller, novelist, writer. He talks about putting things on an axis of so the x-axis is good fortune, bad at the bottom, good at the top, and the y-axis is time. And so he's at the very beginning, you could be a bit above, a bit below, or neutral, and then it rises a little bit, and then something happens. I'm reading a great book by a storyteller, and he talks about his grandmother, and one of the sayings of his grandmother was, and then something happened, and if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have a story to tell you. So that's what we call the trigger. And then everything goes downhill from there. Kurt Vonnegut calls it the man in the hole. You fall in the hole, just like in Billy Wilder says, the tree goes on fire. And then there's a low point of the story. When you think things can't get worse. And in that low point, there's a trigger that the main character goes through. And he or she makes a decision, and that starts the journey upward. This is really the focus of the story, is the struggle back to normalcy. Now, that's what it is, and this is the whole middle part, and then the beginning, middle, and end, and then in the end, it's all about, okay, finally succeeding or resolution of some sort, and then what happens after that? Just like they lived happily ever after, or whatever it is. So there it is. That's it. The beginning, middle, and end. But now, that's easy for people to know. It's hard for people to really adapt it to their own situation. But so let me talk about what happens in each of those cases. So in the beginning, there's always a little bit of context. This is in a movie where we talk about, the camera on the front dash of a car as you pan as it's driving down the highway, or the long shot of the alarm clock where you see the person sleeping in their bed and already you have a sense of who they are, what they do, and you get a sense of who they are. And then something happens. There's the triggering event. The triggering event. And this, by the way, same holds true for a case study. Company going along fine, and then triggering event, something happened where they realized they had to make a change. But they don't make a change because it's hard to make a change. And most people are stuck on a train of inertia. And so what happens is they go downhill from there until they can't get any deeper. They can't sink any lower. And at the low point, they realize we got to do something else. In the case study, it's like, this is where they brought me in because I'm the hero. This is where I'm going to fix everything. This is where we discovered the secret sauce or whatever it is. And then the struggle is all the secondary struggles in actually implementing it. Now we're back on the uphill slope of the struggle. So and then we succeed. There it is. It sounds simplistic, but when you think about it, every movie, every story, every case story follows the same pattern. So there are a couple of things. There's the presenting challenge or the trigger, then there's the low point, and then at that point there's the deeper challenge. So in other words, there's the trigger, which is the presenting challenge, but there's always a deeper challenge. And then there's the key resource. That's an NLP term. What is the thing that I have to acquire? Could be a mindset, could be a weapon, it's the secret sauce. It could be the key to success. It could be the thing that I was ignoring. Could be a change in my belief system. Could be whatever it is. But this is what the movie's about. It's not about the trigger. The trigger is just the trigger. The presenting challenge is just a presenting challenge. It's an excuse to bring in these universal themes. So this allows me to talk about the other key thing that is really important. And I feel a little bit awkward because here I am jabbering on about this, and I kind of feel like I need to, in a real workshop, I'd be doing diagrams and all that. But hopefully you get the idea. In every story, there are two challenges. There's the challenge we see that makes the story unique. And then there's the deeper challenge, the internal challenge, the challenge that's not immediately obvious. And that's the challenge that makes the story universal. So
the human connection.
Pardon me?
The human connection.
It's the human connection. So every single Batman movie, it's Batman against the Joker. It's Batman against, name me any one of his nemesis that he had in more recently, even the most recent one. It's about his
Ra's al Ghul or Catwoman or Penguin or whatever. It doesn't matter.
You're right.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the story unique. But in every single story, who is he really battling? He's battling his sense of self. He's coming to terms with himself as an orphan. He's coming to terms with the horrific history of his parents being murdered in front of him. He's struggling with being accepted as this dark angel, as doing good but not being valued for. These are all universal themes that we can all relate to. And every single Batman movie is the same thing. Right. Now, it doesn't have to be Batman. Do you remember the movie Swept Away with Tom Hanks?
Oh, and it's all the same. And you know what? What's amazing to me is so many of us struggle with this idea of we have to be more unique or it has to be totally different. But we never actually get tired of these stories.
These stories are what connect us to everybody else.
Exactly.
That's what attracts us when we're on stage. When we give a case study in a corporate thing, it's what the potential client will read into it and says, you know what, we have that challenge too. In other words, we tried implementing a CRM, but it was the changing of the culture that made it such a big problem for us. Do you see what I mean?
Exactly.
So there's always a presenting challenge and a triggering event, but there's also, and that's what makes it unique for sure, but there's also, and this is the more important piece, this is, the universal challenge that we all identify with. So I was about to talk about Tom Hanks in Swept Away. Let me put into these different phases of the story. The very beginning, context. You don't need much of it. As Kurt Vonnegut says, start as close to the end as you can. Most people put in way too much context, way more than they need. You only need a little bit. So at the very beginning, you see Tom Hanks, and you see that he's obsessed with time. He's obsessed with being true to his word. And when he tells his fiancée, because he's got a real, he's a very moral character, very, very, like
very upright.
Said,
yeah.
Yeah. And when he's sent to Moscow on this mission, to deliver some parcels or something for FedEx, he just got to go. He's got to go. And he tells his fiancée, don't worry, I'll be back before Christmas. And that's all the setup you need to know the kind of person he is. And so the triggering event is when his plane goes down. And you know his world is turned upside down because of the little bit of information that we had about him at the beginning. And then you see him sink lower and lower and lower, and you think the struggle is all about him learning how to survive on the island. And that's the surface struggle. That's what makes the story unique. But what is it really? The story is about a universal theme about coming to terms with where you are in life. It's learning to love yourself. It's longing for human compassion. It's having to change every conception and perception of who you are. And the low point isn't when he almost dies of starvation or thirst. The low point is when he thinks he can't go on anymore and he tries to kill himself. And he realizes that the rope broke because he know how anal he is. He ties a rock to it first to make sure that, or a log to it first to make sure that it can hold his weight, and it doesn't. And he realizes he can't do this anymore. He can't even do that. But if he just holds on to hope and faith, and if he just keeps breathing, things will work out. And that's the key resource that he holds on to. Really, the story is about how he makes that, how he changes his belief system to make that work for him, for survival. That's what the story is about. And then everybody, would say, if you don't think about this too deeply, you say, well, the climax is when he gets rescued by that passing commercial ship. No, that's not the climax. The climax is when he meets up with his fiancée again. You don't know what's going to happen, and you realize that she's remarried, and you don't know what's going to happen, and she can't accept him. I mean, they buried him. And there's a little bit of humor in that. He says, "Oh, what was in the coffin?" Every drama has humor. Every humor, every comedy has drama. But anyway, that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the climax. And what does he say? He says, "I realized all I need to do is keep breathing. All I need to do is have faith. Tomorrow is another day." And that's when he gets in his car, and he's in Memphis. Remember, he drives. Where does he drive? He drives north to Canada. Why? Because he can. And you realize that moral, that lesson, that key insight that he says at the end is exactly the lesson that he learned on the deserted island. And so it's the same thing when we tell our stories. It's really important that we understand what is the trigger point, what is the low point, what is the presenting challenge, and then what, more importantly, is the deeper challenge. Most people say, "Oh, I don't want to bore you with those details." No, that's the part that we want to know. What is the deeper challenge? Why was it so difficult for you to turn your life around? And the key resource, which I said, is what is the thing that you could latch onto or discover that helped you in that change? And then really the struggle is how do you reconcile the two and become a new person at the end? That's whole evolution of character. We go through this all the time. When we have a bad experience in grade 2, it's the presenting challenge is what our teacher told us. The deeper challenge is what it did to our psyche, our self-identity. And the low point is when it shows up and surfaces later in life and we realize we're running according to the same program. And what did we have to change when we realized I am not putting up with this anymore? That's the story.
So now I want to just bring back to our listeners here today. What are a couple of steps that they could take to start exploring their own stories and making use of them?
Say that again. How do they?
Yeah. What are a couple of things that a couple actions people could take or something they could try to start exploring their own stories and how their own stories might be useful to forward becoming, getting out in the world and connecting with the people they want to connect with?
Whenever you have an insight, that insight comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from nothing. And so that's really the best place. When you realize you had, that I really learned something there. That really taught me something. Well, where did I learn it from? And you start to go kind of introspective into the backstory for that insight, and that's your story. That's what also helps you make that lesson or learning for yourself more concrete, and in doing so, you put it in a form that is valuable and relatable to other people. So that's one area. But now you may have an insight, but you may not realize you have an insight. So it might come from a comment from somebody else where somebody said, that's pretty cool. I never realized that. And you kind of have to train yourself to listen for those moments. And you say, oh, yeah, that is pretty cool. Where did I learn that? I don't know. Maybe, something that I've always believed in from wait a minute, in grade 2, and so on. You get it?
Yes, you start to be able to follow the thread from your current reality back to where you may have originally come to a belief or come to a decision point, and then, start looking at telling that story. So, for example, for me, going back to in your interview on the show, I shared a little bit about how you kind of pulled the story from me about how I found my purpose in life at 7 years old through watching the Ginsu knife demonstration at the county fair.
Yes.
And that was a really powerful moment for me. It taught me a lot about myself, and it's something that a story now I've told a bunch of times to help people get thinking about where their own purpose comes from, and also the power of their own voice and the power. This whole message of the power of your voice. Yeah. Well, it never occurred to me previously that I found my purpose in life when I was 7 through the Ginsu knife demonstration. But I started, like you said, thinking about, well, what am I known for? What am I good at? What are my values? And I started thinking about remembering those important times in my life, going back further and further and further. And I hit on this moment of thinking about telling my parents and being so excited, showing them, kind of demonstrating these amazing Ginsu knives, and aren't they incredible? And why that was so important to me at the time. Why were those knives so important to me at the time? What did it mean to me? What did I make that mean? And that opened up a whole other set of conversations for me, for myself, in exploring my own values and what's been really important to me from a young child.
Yeah.
So that's a way we can kind of look at following that thread back. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Superstarters, as you're going out into the world this week, start to look at your own story, start to explore these insights, and apply this story structure that Michel has shared with you today. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly universal. And you start to look for the stories all around you. You'll start to notice this 3-act structure everywhere. And the more you notice it, the more you'll be able to follow the storyline and then apply it into your own life, your own business, your own sales pages or blog posts or speaking or wherever you're going to be applying this incredible power of storytelling. And I, of course, encourage you to connect with Michel and with Momondays as well. The links are here on the page, but also it's momondays.com and Neray.com. Right, Michel? Those are the two?
Yep. Neray.com is where I do my corporate work and my consulting and coaching. And Momondays.com is where we run Momondays, which is the once-a-month show that you talked about, and also where we have the Purposeful Storytelling workshops.
Yeah, and if you can get yourself to a Momondays to experience that event, and maybe even, if you want to go even further, go to a live workshop, or even consider bringing Momondays to your town or city, I highly recommend it. I've been a Mo host myself, and it's an extraordinary platform, an extraordinary experience, especially if you're an entrepreneur. So, Michel, before I let you go, first of all, thank you for everything you shared today. My absolute pleasure having you here on the show. And just one question I wanted to ask you before I let you go. What's the legacy that you'd like to leave in this world?
I think oh God, I wish I'd thought about this before.
I don't want you to think about it before. I want it to just come from your gut.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. I am really excited with how we're changing lives through Momondays. I truly believe that, and this should come as no surprise to people who have heard me so far on this call, but I truly believe that our personal stories are our most powerful tools, weapons, our assets to make change in the world. I think and I've seen this, you've seen this at Momondays, when people are sharing their personal stories on stage, or privately, all the labels, black, white, Muslim, Jew, Christian, gay, bi, whatever, all those labels kind of fall away. And what you see is the humanness, the universal human spirit. And so when that happens, it's all like, you can't help but take on the values that we say we all cherish, tolerance, peace, all of those things, because we realize at our core we're all the same. So I truly believe that I hope my legacy, whether it happens through Momondays or some other way, is really about giving people permission to let down their guard, be open and human with one another. And I think that every time we do that, we take one additional step toward world peace.
Thank you, Michel.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, my friend. All right, superstarters, go out there and create some more world peace. Peace in yourselves, peace in your communities, peace in the world. We're all living our purpose, and the more we do that, and the more we share our humanity and stories, the better off the whole world is. So thank you for joining us on the Backstage Pass. We'll see you next time.